Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
All right, we're now talking about subsection 2, the need to be people-centered. Why is it so important? Why can't we just design products without worrying about all those people? So here's this little dog. I'm sure many of you love dogs. And you see this cute looking thing and you go near it, doggy doggy and very, very excited and all that. And then when you go close, this is what it does. So this happens, right? And this is what it feels like when a product is not designed from the user perspective. So it can either be something that is comfortable and pleasant as an experience, or it can be something that you expect to be comfortable and pleasant, and when you go and start interacting with it, it comes to bite you. Not literally, but it becomes very unpleasant. So the other takeaway from this is that not only products that are not designed from a user-centric perspective, not only do they not behave as you would expect them to, but also that it's not just about the appearance, but it's also about the behavior. So it appears a certain way, but it behaves in a very different way. Every organization believes that they are customer-centric. If you look at the product creation process at organizations, they more or less look something like this. You know, the different cycles that they go through of need finding, analysis, research, testing, feedback, etc., and so on and so forth. Nobody believes that they are not customer-centric. But innovation, true innovation, happens when we put people at the center of this process. And we look at this, we begin to look at this very differently. The minute we put the people at the center of the process, our whole approach, our whole thinking starts to be very different. Because we are solving their problems, and we're not solving the problems that we think need to be solved. We're solving the problems that they need solved, they, the people. This is an article. We'll look a little bit now at the business impact, the business side of things, and design thinking, how it works with from the business perspective and for the businesses. So this is an article in the business magazine called Forbes, and it says why design thinking should be at the core of your business strategy development. These are some excerpts out of the article. It says design thinking is product and repeatable problem-solving protocol that any business or profession can employ to achieve very big results. It combines creative and critical thinking. Some of the things we just discussed earlier, creative and critical thinking. It also says design thinking should be at the core of strategy development and organizational change to create a culture focused on this way of solving problems. When we're talking about shifting the culture of an organization, shifting the whole way that the organization thinks about their customers, what we're talking about is mindset changes. Mindset changes of the type that we are engaging in through this course. This way of thinking can be applied to products, services, and processes. Anything that needs to be improved. And it further says Apple and Google use design thinking in their day-to-day operations. And we can see that happening, right? We can see what's happening through their products. This was a study reported in Harvard Business Review, which is another business magazine, that talks about design can drive exceptional returns for shareholders. So now it's not just about the people for whom we are designing, it's also for the business. It needs to finally make business sense. So this company called Motive Strategies and Design Management Institute conducted this research where they tried to find, define and locate companies that are design centric, that where design thinking is part of their DNA. And they were able to only identify 12 companies, and these are those 12 companies. And they defined what they called a design value index, and they studied the performance of these companies over a 10-year period versus companies that were not design centric. And what they found is that there's a huge difference in the return return for shareholders. So it yielded returns, 100,000 investment in design-centric companies would have yielded returns 228% greater than the same investment in companies that were not design-centric. So this is another interesting angle that helps you understand that design also impacts the business. This was the cover page of Business Week several years ago. And it had this front page article about all the technology and complexity associated with technology related grief that users, customers on a day-to-day basis have to go through. It says, from VCRs and telephones to copiers and microwaves, poorly designed machines cluttered with unwanted features are driving consumers crazy. Whatever happened to user-friendly? So we can see that it's not just about us, creating a product and then creating a product to be user-centric, but also understanding that it impacts the business. So this is a study that I would like to share with you and reported by the Nielsen Norman Group. This is from a study of the Mozilla Firefox, the web browser. And they were basically trying to go through a redesign of their support site. And this redesign happened over this period, January, February, and March. And this is showing you how results were evident as a result of this redesign after that period. So one of the things you can see is the volume of questions that users were posing to their support site, their customer support site, dropped from this to this, and also the percentage that they were able to respond within a 24-hour period rose, that they were able to respond to a lot more questions. And this is another view of that where they zoomed in on the January, February, March and the period following thereafter after launch. And this shows you that the volume of questions dropped, as we saw, and the volume of the answers also started to match. So therefore, it showed a good match between the user needs and the customer support capacity after the redesign, while before they were hugely lagging behind. So there was a big queue of customer support related queries that were not being answered. So this is the impact of a user-centric redesign. And looking at the return on investment, the investment in redesigning this was 14 person weeks, and the return was 3 times better performance. So if you're able to translate this into numbers, you can say that 3 times better performance means each person is being able to address 3 times the volume, or perhaps that we're looking at being able to do the same work with 1/3 the people. So various business implications. Now let's look at an example from a people perspective. This is the story of American Airlines Flight 965. That was flying from, this was in 1995, flying from Miami to Colombia, Cali. And this was the route that they were flying. So it departed from Miami to Cali, Colombia. On the landing approach, before landing, the pilot had to pick the next radio navigation selection, and the code, they pick airport codes called, and the correct code was ROSO. Now, he selected R, and the flight management system got populated with all the R's. And he did something which is a very normal, natural, human thing to do. He picked the first of those options. And you and I know that we do this all the time, right? See something reasonable, enter, enter, enter. Just get through it quickly, right? So he picked R, and what happened is, by selecting the first of these, instead of Rosso, he selected Romeo. That was the first of those selections. And it went off into a completely different place, 132 miles northeast. So this is where Romeo led him, and this is where Rosso had to lead him. And 152 passengers and 8 crew members died. Very, very simple design-related issue. There was a time in history, over the course of the maturation of this profession as it is today that we're talking about, human-centered design, when this used to be called human error, pilot error, right? Now we know that there are human capacities and limitations and expectations that we need to design for, that we need to understand first. Here's another simple example where we have the hot and the cold taps, right? And we know these kind of taps move clockwise and anti-clockwise, and we have a notion in our heads that you turn it anti-clockwise and it opens, and you turn it clockwise and it closes. Now look at this. The cold water goes that way, the hot water goes in the reverse direction. So you turn it clockwise to open and anti-clockwise to close. What might be the cost of this? What if you are bathing a baby over there and by mistake you close the cold water or you increase the hot water, right? It can be quite disastrous. This is an example of a stove, the 4 burners, and this was a subject of a lot of study early in the days of this profession, that how do people connect the knobs over here with the 4 burners, which burner corresponds to which knob. So if you look at this, this is the front which corresponds to this is the rear. So in this case, however, this is not the front, this is the rear, and this is the front. This corresponds to the front. The middle one is for the oven. So there's a sort of spatial arrangement over here, whereas over here a linear arrangement is followed. So perhaps it can cause confusion among people. This is just a representation of a story I'm about to tell you, reported by Gray Chang, where there was this photocopier in an office, and this photocopier needed pages to be fed manually, one at a time. Right? You couldn't put a stack of pages. And when the machine was working, when it was copying, the green indicator light came on. And when the machine was idle, the red indicator light came on. Now, this is how the machine behaves, right? Now, what about me as the user? What this means for me is that when the machine is showing red, I'm supposed to feed paper in it. And when it's showing green, I cannot feed paper in it. So this is the opposite, perhaps, of how we think, how we as people think, and perhaps opposite also of how the traffic light metaphor is. So it's important for us to also understand. We looked at the people side of it. We looked at the business side of it. Now we also need to understand that people make judgments based on the appearance. They make judgments about value. So now if we look at this storefront, right? This is one storefront and this is another. Now based on this busy and very loud visuals that we see over here, people make certain judgments and perceptions about value. So the perceived value, they would look at this as something that is more maybe sophisticated, more classy, and they would look at this as something that is more, maybe not so well designed, not so well put together, not a good quality store, right? Same thing carried forward in the world of the web. If you look at these two examples, right, with the choice of the fonts and the colors and the cutesy kind of little graphics and everything, perhaps Tiger Air gives the impression of being a more of a low-cost airline, more of a not as conscientious about quality perhaps, whereas the one on the left, Singapore, with its design and its appearance and everything, it gives a feeling more of being perhaps a better service airline. Nothing wrong with either of those. It really depends on your priority. So whether it's service is paramount or low cost is paramount. But the point is that users, customers, when they come to these, they make perceptions about value, about what this presents, what this means. So perceived value, right? And important to remember that for a customer, perception is reality. Okay, so this is another element of the design that comes very importantly to bear. This was a study of monthly snack boxes that are delivered to people, and these are two services. One is box green and guilt free, and they went through a usability testing, and it was found that the majority of the people preferred the one on the left. The service was completely comparable. There was no difference between the two in quality and everything. However, people had a perception, they had a judgment, and that is the judgment they made about perceived value. It was not about the actual value. The actual value was the same, but the perceived value. So this is also something that we need to keep in mind when we design products and services for users, that people will make judgments, people will attach value to what they see. So along with this, also understanding that it impacts the business, understanding how people make errors if the design is not reflecting the way they think it should be behaving. If the design behaves in a completely different way, then people make errors. So therefore, the need to be really people-centric, because being people-centric or not being people-centric, it impacts across the board. It impacts, the performance, it impacts people's perceptions, it impacts the business, it impacts shareholder value, and all of those things. So, as by now, I'm sure you're convinced of the importance and the need to be people-centric.